In the shadowed corridors of Windsor, far from the polished optics of state banquets and public smiles, a definitive and devastating strike has been launched from the very heart of the British monarchy. This is not merely a dispute over a property. It is a calculated dismantling of a prince's final defenses. King Charles III, a monarch who has spent decades navigating the complexities of duty and family, has reportedly reached a point of no return. Sources deep within the palace walls suggest that the king has authorized a surgical exposure of Prince Andrew's most private financial sanctuary, his hidden assets. For years, the Royal Lodge has stood as a symbol of Andrew's stubborn defiance, a fortress of his former life that he refused to vacate despite the stripping of his titles and the collapse of his public standing. But what the world is witnessing now is the collapse of that defiance. The Crown has officially set in motion a legal and institutional siege, suing to reclaim the royal estate and, in the process, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain on a web of offshore accounts, luxury acquisitions, and secret trusts that were never meant to see the light of day. This is the night the palace dropped its guard. It is no longer about privacy or family dignity. Those shields have been shattered by the cold reality of institutional survival. The king has reportedly chosen the survival of the monarchy over the protection of his brother. To the outside world, Andrew appeared as a prince with no income, a man living on the margins of the royal budget. But the audit authorized by the king reveals a different story, a hidden empire of wealth that directly contradicts the narrative of financial struggle. As the corridors of Buckingham Palace hum with the frantic energy of lawyers and senior aides, the atmosphere is charged with a quiet panic. Prince Andrew, once the favorite son, now finds himself facing a monarch who has replaced sentiment with strategy. This legal action is a line in the sand, a symbolic and literal reclamation of power. The king is signaling to the world and to his own family that the era of secret deals and unearned privilege is over. Inside the legal documents now circulating among a restricted circle of advisors, the specificity is chilling. We are talking about precise dates, offshore jurisdictions, and signatures that map a decades-long drift away from accountability. This wasn't an accident. It was a strategy of concealment that has finally met its match in a king who says, "No more hiding. Stay with us," because as the crown moves to take back what it believes belongs to the people, we are about to uncover exactly how deep this betrayal goes, and which hidden name on these financial ledgers truly broke the king's trust. This is not just a royal drama, this is a constitutional earthquake. As the legal machinery of the crown grinds forward, the focus shifts from the grand halls of Windsor to the digital shadows of global finance. For decades, the public was led to believe that Prince Andrew's lifestyle was sustained by a modest naval pension and the waning generosity of the late Queen. But the documents unearthed in this latest royal audit tell a far more complex and troubling story. King Charles has reportedly authorized the release of internal memos that map out a shadow treasury, a collection of assets that Andrew allegedly moved through intermediaries to avoid palace oversight. Sources close to the investigation describe the atmosphere inside the palace as clinical and cold. There is no room left for brotherly affection when the stability of the throne is at stake. The king's legal team is not just looking for a few missing pounds. They are documenting a systematic breach of the royal code. The lawsuit to reclaim the Royal Lodge is the gateway to exposing these hidden ledgers. By suing for the estate, the crown gains the legal leverage to demand a full accounting of how a prince with no visible career could maintain one of the most expensive residences in the United Kingdom. The audit reveals a pattern of ambition without mandate. We are seeing evidence of offshore entities linked to past business associates and luxury investments that were never declared to the royal household. To King Charles, this isn't just a financial discrepancy. It is a documented lie. The king is said to have been visibly shaken, not by the amount of money, but by the sheer scale of the secrecy. For a monarch attempting to lead a slimmed-down and transparent institution, Andrew's hidden wealth is an existential threat. Princess Anne, acting once again as the moral compass of the family, is reportedly the one who urged the king to take this formal step. She understood that as long as these assets remained hidden, they could be used as leverage against the crown by outside forces. Her plea to the king was simple: "We cannot protect what we do not know." This led to the pivotal moment where Charles chose the machine over the man, ordering the legal teams to leave no stone unturned. The implications of this exposure go beyond the family circle. If a senior royal could hide millions while claiming financial hardship, it raises hard questions about the transparency of the entire institution. This is why the Crown's lawsuit is so aggressive. It is a desperate attempt to regain the public's trust by being the first to expose its own. The king is not waiting for the press to find these assets. He is putting them on the table himself, signaling that the era of optics first is dead. Stay with us as we move into the next layer of this crisis, where we reveal the specific offshore accounts and the mysterious benefactor whose name appeared on a signature line that finally forced King Charles to say, "No more hiding." The true shockwave of this legal siege lies not just in the assets themselves, but in the names attached to them. As the Crown's investigators sifted through the complex layers of Prince Andrew's private trusts, they reportedly stumbled upon a signature that froze the proceedings in their tracks. This was the hidden name, an anonymous benefactor whose financial ties to Andrew suggest a level of influence that bypasses royal protocol entirely. To King Charles, this was the ultimate betrayal. A senior royal allowing outside interests to bankroll a lifestyle that the monarchy had officially defunded. This discovery led to a confrontation that palace insiders describe as the most tense since the king's accession. Behind the heavy doors of the king's private study, the air was thick with the weight of documented truth. Charles did not come with accusations. He came with ledgers. He presented evidence of a mysterious offshore account in the Virgin Islands, one that had been fueling the maintenance of the Royal Lodge for years, hidden behind a shell company. The king's message was sharp and final. You are no longer just a liability. You are a security risk. The lawsuit to reclaim the royal estate is now moving from a property dispute to a full-scale audit of foreign influence. By suing Andrew, the Crown is essentially forcing a public disclosure in a controlled environment, preventing these secrets from being used as blackmail by those who hold the keys to Andrew's hidden wealth. The king is reportedly acting on a strategy designed to cleanse the ledgers before the next generation takes the throne. Princess Anne's role in this stage has been one of ruthless efficiency. She is said to have overseen the cordon of silence, ensuring that no one, not even Andrew's closest associates, could preempt the king's legal move. Her perspective is cold and institutional. If a prince accepts a life raft from an unknown source, he is no longer a servant of the crown, but a servant to his creditors. The panic is no longer quiet. It is audible within the royal corridors. As the Crown's legal team prepares to file the next set of disclosures, the question hanging over Windsor is no longer about whether Andrew will move out, but who else will be exposed when the full list of benefactors is revealed. The king has stripped away the fairy tale, leaving only the clinical reality of power and the consequences of secrecy. The focus of the Crown's legal assault now narrows to the specific financial black hole of the Royal Lodge, a 30-room mansion that has become the front line of this constitutional battle. For years, Prince Andrew maintained the facade that the estate was being kept up through his own private means. But the king's audit has exposed a chilling reality. The ledgers reveal that the astronomical costs of security, staffing, and maintenance, estimated at over £2 million annually, were being funneled through a network of shell companies that lead back to the very anonymous benefactor previously identified. To King Charles, this isn't just a breach of trust. It is evidence that a royal residence was effectively being operated under the influence of an outside entity. Inside the palace, the metaphor of the Royal Lodge has shifted from a fortress of protection to a prison of Andrew's own making. The Crown's lawsuit specifically targets the lease agreement, arguing that the source of the funds used for maintenance violates the integrity of the estate clause. By choosing a legal path rather than a simple eviction, the king is forcing the courts to validate his authority, ensuring that Andrew cannot rely on the private. The moment Prince Andrew realized the walls were closing in reportedly occurred when the palace's financial comptroller, acting on direct orders from the king, cut off the lodge's internal support systems. This was the clinical strike that Princess Anne had advocated for, a demonstration that without the king's consent, the prince is powerless. No longer able to hide behind the ambiguity of family loyalty, Andrew is now facing the stark choice of total financial disclosure or immediate forfeiture of the estate. The psychological toll within the royal household is immense, as staff and advisors are forced to choose between the king's new transparency and the old guard's culture of secrecy. Charles is said to be looking beyond the current scandal, viewing this reclamation as a stress test for the future of the monarchy. He is signaling that even a prince is mortal and subject to the same standards of accountability as any other citizen when the survival of the institution is at stake. As the legal net tightens, the Crown's strategy moves from financial auditing to a deeper institutional purge. King Charles has reportedly initiated a standard of conduct review that goes beyond the Royal Lodge, using the lawsuit as a precedent to redefine what it means to be a working royal in the modern era. The king is no longer interested in the gentlemen's agreements of the past. He is demanding a formalization of loyalty that is documented, signed, and enforceable. This shift is described by palace insiders as a monarchy forced to admit it is mortal, where every asset and every alliance must be justified under the cold light of public accountability. Prince Andrew's defense, once anchored in the belief that the family always protects its own, has effectively collapsed. The king's decision to move legally against his own brother has created a fracture from within that traditional palace damage control can no longer bridge. Charles is said to be viewing this confrontation as a necessary cleansing of the ledgers, ensuring that no hidden debts or secret benefactors can haunt the reign of his heir, Prince William. This is the strategic reckoning that Princess and reportedly warned was inevitable if the institution wanted to survive the 21st century. The psychological pressure inside the fortress is now being felt by Andrew's remaining staff, who find themselves caught between a prince's demands and a king's decree. Reports suggest that several long-term employees have been approached by the Crown's legal team to provide voluntary disclosures regarding the origins of the anonymous funds. This isn't just an investigation. It is a dismantling of a support system that has operated in the shadows for far too long. The message from Buckingham Palace is clear. The mask has dropped, and the era of royal immunity for financial secrecy is officially at an end. The legal pressure exerted by King Charles has triggered what insiders are calling a silent exodus from within Prince Andrew's inner circle. As the Crown's lawsuit officially demands a transparent accounting of the Royal Lodge's operational costs, the traditional wall of silence that protected the prince for decades is rapidly crumbling. Long-term staff, fearing legal repercussions or the loss of their own professional standing, are reportedly cooperating with the king's financial investigators. This is the internal collapse that the king's advisors had predicted, a scenario where the prince's support system is dismantled not by force, but by the cold reality of judicial scrutiny. Documents recently filed by the Crown's legal team suggest that the investigation has moved beyond the anonymous benefactor and is now scrutinizing a series of high-value gifts and informal loans that were never reported to the palace's oversight committee. To King Charles, these findings represent a fundamental breach of the sovereign's trust. The king is reportedly using these disclosures to justify a broader palace purge, removing anyone who facilitated or ignored this shadow financial network. The message is unmistakable. Loyalty to a prince does not grant immunity from the laws of the crown. Princess Anne is said to be the architect of this systematic clearing. Her approach is described as surgical, focusing on removing the enablers who allowed the prince to believe he was above the institutional rules. In private meetings, she has reportedly emphasized that the monarchy cannot demand sacrifices from the public while harboring a culture of concealment within its own ranks. The reclamation of the Royal Lodge is the physical manifestation of this purge, a cleansing of the estate that symbolizes the cleansing of the institution itself. As the king moves to finalize the legal reclamation, the atmosphere at Windsor has shifted from tension to a somber realization. The prince's isolation is nearly complete. With his hidden assets exposed and his staff retreating, the Royal Lodge has become a hollow shell of its former glory. Charles is not merely winning a lawsuit. He is rewriting the moral contract of the royal family. The era of the untouchable prince has ended, replaced by a reign where transparency is the only currency that matters. The legal battle has now reached a fever pitch, evolving from a family dispute into what historians are already calling a constitutional earthquake. By suing to reclaim the Royal Lodge and exposing the prince's hidden assets, King Charles has effectively set a new legal precedent that challenges the very concept of royal immunity. The king's legal team is reportedly arguing that royal status is not a shield for financial opacity, a statement that has sent shockwaves through the highest levels of British government and aristocracy. This isn't just about one man's wealth. It is a fundamental shift in how power and accountability are balanced within a modern constitutional monarchy. For the first time in centuries, the private dealings of a senior royal are being subjected to the same level of judicial oversight as a public institution. Charles is said to be resolute, viewing this legal crusade as a stress test for the survival of the crown in the 21st century. He is signaling that the era of the monarchy being a harmless fairy tale is over, replaced by a system that must justify its existence through transparency and adherence to the law. The king's decision to drop the mask has revealed a system at its breaking point, where the survival of the institution now depends on the surgical removal of its most problematic elements. Princess and strategic warning that the wrong move could lead to irreversible damage now appears. Prophetic. The exposure of Andrew's offshore accounts and secret trusts has forced the palace machine to confront a reality it tried to control for decades. The king and his heir, Prince William, reportedly stand side by side in this mission, admitting that the secrecy of the past nearly caused the institution to slip away. This is the strategic reckoning that required a king to overrule his own court just to tell the truth. The atmosphere within the palace is one of clinical focus, as the legal proceedings move toward a final judgment. The king's willingness to allow truth to be dragged out at the last possible moment has redefined the moral contract between the sovereign and the people. As the crown prepares for the next phase of the lawsuit, the question is no longer about property, but about the very soul of the monarchy. Charles has chosen a path where humanity and honesty must finally triumph over the cold, unyielding machinery of the old palace guard. As the legal crusade reaches its final stages, the shadow of the future king, Prince William, looms larger over the proceedings. It is increasingly clear that this is not just Charles's battle, but a joint operation between the king and his heir to ensure the crown they pass on is not tainted by the scandals of the past. William is reportedly the driving force behind the new protocol, a set of stringent financial transparency rules that will govern all senior royals moving forward. This protocol, forged in the fires of the Prince Andrew crisis, demands an end to the culture of shadow treasuries and anonymous benefactors. Inside the palace, the atmosphere has shifted from a house divided to a system in the midst of a hard reset. The king and William have reportedly held private meetings with constitutional experts to finalize a contingency plan for institutional integrity, signaling that the monarchy will no longer rely on unwritten codes of conduct. By choosing to sue Andrew in a public forum, they are admitting that the palace machine of the past, which prioritized optics and secrecy over truth, has failed. Princess and continues to act as the enforcer of this transition, ensuring that the truth dragged out at the last possible moment becomes the new baseline for royal operations. She understands that the monarchy must adapt to human vulnerability and institutional honesty if it hopes to survive a world that no longer believes in harmless fairy tales. The Royal Lodge, once a fortress of privilege, now stands as a monument to this transformation, a physical space being reclaimed to prove that the crown's loyalty belongs to its duty, not to its personal debts. This is the moment the palace truly dropped the mask. Every legal filing and every exposed asset serves as a stress test for a system that is finally admitting it can bleed. Charles and William are standing side by side, not just as father and son, but as the architects of a monarchy that recognizes health, honesty, and transparency are not optional background noises, but the very foundation of its survival. The clinical dismantling of Prince Andrew's financial empire has triggered a broader collapse of the old guard within the palace walls. As the king's legal victory becomes a reality, the culture of secrecy and control that once protected the institution's most problematic figures is being forcibly replaced by a new, harsh reality. King Charles and Prince William are reportedly using this moment to reset the monarchy, ensuring that the shadow of the past can no longer influence the future of the crown. The lawsuit has acted as a catalyst, proving that the monarchy is no longer afraid to admit its own vulnerabilities in order to survive. Princess Anne's measured warnings have now evolved into a systematic restructuring of royal authority. To the king, the reclamation of the Royal Lodge is not just a property win. It is a test case for whether an ancient institution can adapt to the modern demands of humanity and honesty. The mask has dropped for good, revealing a palace that is more concerned with institutional integrity than with managing optics. This isn't just about the prince's hidden assets. It is about who gets to own the story of the British monarchy moving forward. The atmosphere at Windsor is no longer one of routine and tradition, but one of strategic deliberation and absolute accountability. Senior palace officials who once operated behind layers of protocol are now being held to the same standards of honest vulnerability that Princess Kate demonstrated during her own crisis. The king has signaled that the era of pretending nothing ever breaks behind palace walls is over. Every move, every revelation, and every legal filing in this case has served to rewrite the monarchy's script for the 21st century. As the crown prepares to finalize the legal proceedings, the prince finds himself in a position of complete isolation. With his financial secrets exposed and his internal alliances shattered, the Royal Lodge stands as a silent witness to a system that has finally reached its breaking point. Charles and William stand side by side, finally telling the world that the fairy tale is dead, replaced by a constitutional monarchy that is willing to bleed in order to remain relevant. The final curtain is falling on this clinical drama of power, secrecy, and institutional survival. King Charles III and Prince William have successfully maneuvered the monarchy through its most dangerous internal fracture, proving that silence in a public institution is a luxury the crown can no longer afford. The reclamation of the Royal Lodge is complete, but the victory is somber. A definitive admission that the fairy tale monarchy is dead, replaced by a system that must admit it can bleed to remain relevant in a modern world. The prince's hidden empire of wealth has been laid bare, not as a sign of strength, but as a documented breach of trust that required a king to choose his duty over his brother. This wasn't just about a property or offshore accounts. It was a test case for whether an ancient institution can adapt to the demands of humanity and honesty. By choosing to drop the mask, Charles has signaled to the world that privacy can no longer be used as a shield for financial opacity or institutional concealment. Princess Anne's measured warnings have been vindicated, as the strategic reckoning she advocated for has finally cleansed the royal ledgers of the shadow of the past. The monarchy that emerges from this constitutional earthquake is one that recognizes health, honesty, and transparency are the only currencies that matter. As the corridors of Buckingham Palace return to a state of clinical calm, the message to the public is clear. The crown no longer manages just feelings. It manages perception through the lens of truth. The era of the untouchable prince has been erased by the king's own hand, ensuring that Prince William inherits a throne built on the foundation of accountability rather than unearned privilege. The new protocol is now the law of the land, a permanent reminder that even behind the most ornate palace walls, silence has a cost. In the end, this crisis didn't destroy the monarchy, it forced it to become human. By allowing the truth to be dragged out, King Charles has given the crown a chance at a fragile but honest future. The Royal Lodge stands empty, a symbol of a past that preferred optics over reality, while the king and his heir stand together, finally admitting that the only way to survive is to stop pretending that nothing ever breaks.